News into SportsCenter less than 24 hours from a scheduled hearing. Michigan has agreed to accept Jim Harbaugh's 3-game suspension for sign stealing and in-person scouting. Now, in a statement, the school said it had, quote, decided to accept this sanction to return the focus to our student athletes and their performance on the field. Now, the Big Ten has agreed to close its investigation. However, the NCAA is still investigating the situation. Harbaugh will miss the Maryland game on Saturday and a top 3 showdown against Ohio State in 9 days. College football reporter Dan Murphy's on the scene from Ann Arbor and joins us now. Dan, from trying to get a restraining order last week to suddenly accepting the 3-game suspension, you've been covering this story. How surprising was this decision today?
I think we started hearing chatter about a potential settlement late last night and early this morning. But what is the most shocking, Kevin, is that they accepted all of the terms of the suspension, that Harbaugh will serve the rest of this while accepting this settlement, especially after how uncharacteristically blustery and vitriolic some of the statements coming out of Michigan have been in the past week. Jim Harbaugh earlier this week was saying he was looking forward to his chance to have his Tom Cruise "who ordered the code red" moment, right? Ward Manuel, normally a pretty subdued athletic director, said earlier this week that the Big Ten was being unethical, insulting, and an assault on all the rights of everyone in the Big Ten in doling out this punishment. To back away at the 11th hour, we don't know exactly what has changed, but I think after talking to sources here for the past couple hours, it feels safe to assume that some new evidence or something has changed in the thinking to make Michigan have this change of heart here just 12 hours before they were supposed to be getting ready to go into a courtroom and argue for Harbaugh to be back on the sidelines.
Let's stay there. What exactly does Michigan gain here by agreeing to settle now here moving forward?
Yeah, the one other note that was in the statement that Michigan put out and the Big Ten put out this afternoon was saying that the Big Ten has agreed to end its investigation. I don't know that the Big Ten had opened a formal investigation into this, but it does seem to suggest one thing the Big Ten said last week was that they withhold the right to add further punishment on top of this if more evidence comes to light. Remember, the NCAA is continuing to investigate as all this unfolds. We now know, because the Big Ten has ended its investigation, it is very unlikely the NCAA brings down any penalties before the end of the season. If Michigan were to reach the Big Ten championship game or the college football playoff after that, Jim Harbaugh will be on the sidelines for those games.
That is key. Dan Murphy on the scene live from Ann Arbor. For much more on this story, let's go to Elle.
Let's stay here with more reaction to Michigan. Dan Orlovsky joining us here. Just your reaction to Michigan saying, all right, we will accept this 3-game suspension.
Initially, it's like that nonchalance, like, all right, we'll just accept the suspension. Was there more information that was shared maybe behind scenes that I guess maybe the public didn't necessarily know? Or was this a Michigan just coming to a point to say, you know what, we want to get rid of any and all distraction that this was or this has been? If you go back last week to the Penn State game, that interim head coach Sharon Moore's emotion after the game, was there like this emotional toll that was going on within the program, within the team, between coaches and players of the heaviness or the weight of this? Did they just get to a point where they said, you know what, let's just get rid of any conversation that's going on about and or around this and make sure that the team just stays focused on the ultimate goal, which is winning this week and obviously heading to Ohio State next week?
Yeah, we acquiesce is what you're saying. We're not admitting to anything. We're just saying we're going to move on and accept this. But you mentioned that game because essentially that is a playoff eliminator game.
Sure.
What do you give the chances that they can take down Ohio State, their biggest rival, with Harbaugh not on the sidelines? Because he can be at practice.
Yeah, still very good. One, Michigan is one of the most physically dominating teams in all of college football, and we saw that again last weekend. And I think, Elle, this whole situation, every year as you get later into your season and you're a really good team, you're always looking for ways to find finer levels of focus. You know, everyone is, as you get to the back end of the season, is trying to figure out 1% way to get our guys to pay attention just a little bit more in a meeting or a little bit more in a practice. And I think this is going to be that for Michigan. They're going to want to prove themselves that, hey, no matter what, we are the better football team. Obviously, stopping Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a big part of that, but I think they're the better team. And I think because of the situation, this galvanizes that group of 18 to 22-year-old young men to go and accomplish their goal.
More galvanizing, them versus everybody, or being America's team?
You always got to stir the pot.
They don't know. Dan Orlovsky, always stirring our pot here on SportsCenter. It didn't really work, but that's fine. As we now welcome in our college football reporter, Heather Dinich, who has much more on Michigan's decision. The Big Ten's case against Harbaugh and Michigan is done. They said that investigation is closed. But the NCAA's investigation is ongoing. So what's next for the Wolverines regarding that, Heather?
Well, Elle, first with Michigan, it's important to note that the case was dismissed with prejudice, which means that Michigan cannot file this again in that court or bring it back. The Big Ten has agreed to let the NCAA investigation play out as usual in its normal process. And if there's something that the NCAA discovers during the course of its investigation, the Big Ten has reserved the right to do more if it has to. But at this time, the league is not actively looking at any evidence right now.
Next up, of course, now that they know what's going to happen with Harbaugh, is the game. Michigan, a trip to Maryland Saturday. Harbaugh will be watching again from afar. So what's interim head coach Sherrone Moore and the team saying about this weekend's challenge?
Well, the fact that it could be a milestone win for the program if it reaches 1,000 wins on Saturday against Maryland is not lost on anybody in that program. And Moore talked about that this week, and he said it wouldn't count as mine. I'm just standing in there to make sure that we don't mess it up. And there's certainly a sense of it should be Harbaugh's win, but they're obviously going to go and try and get it for him, just as they did last week at Penn State. But it's not lost on anyone that this is Jim Harbaugh's football team and football program, and Moore will certainly, obviously, do the best he can to get that 1,000th win for the Wolverines.
Certainly history on Michigan's side. They've beat the Terps in the last 7 meetings, including 4 straight at College Park, by at least 25 points apiece. Heather Dinich with the latest around Michigan. Kevin?
Super Bowl champ and college football analyst Booger McFarland joining us now. Boog, so from trying to get a restraining order to now accepting a 3-game suspension for Jim Harbaugh, what's your reaction to this decision by Michigan?
Well, Kev, something had to happen. I mean, 7 days ago, they were taking litigation to get a temporary restraining order so he could coach. And now, less than 24 hours before the hearing, they pull it back and say, nah, we don't want it. That tells me a couple things. Number one, Kev, they feel like they can't win. Because I don't know of anybody that has a winning lottery ticket that's going to tear it up and walk away. Number two, they don't want Tony Petitti and the Big Ten digging any deeper into what's going on in Michigan. And so I think the powers that be got together and said, hey, can we handle and deal with this 3-game suspension? Are we going to be able to move efficiently and run our program? And they agreed and said yes, and so they dropped it. I think in the end, though, they didn't think they could win. And for me, Kev, the bigger picture, I think this is the best thing because now we can focus on the field and focus on Michigan and the kids that are on the field. And we don't have to be standing there checking Twitter, watching Courtroom and seeing who's going to investigate like we're watching an episode of Judge Judy. To me, that's the best thing we can do tomorrow.
By the way, Jim Harbaugh, big fan of Judge Judy. Let's stay on the field here. Harbaugh missing the Maryland game this weekend, but in 9 days, Ohio State comes to the Big House with major playoff implications. With Harbaugh out, what kind of impact could his absence have for the 3rd-ranked Wolverines against the number 2 Buckeyes on game day?
Well, I think it's going to be a couple of things. Number one, the motivation. Like, how do you motivate your team like only a head coach can do because he knows the team? And then schematically, Kev, I think it could show its ugly head if the game is off script. And here's what I mean. If there's a decision to be made, do I go for it on 4th and 1? Do I fake a punt? Do I an onside kick on a kickoff? Those little things like that a head coach has to use his gut decision to make, and only the head coach can do it because that's his job and it's his bum that's on the line. I think that's where he's going to be missed. If the game is played on script the way the game was against Penn State, then the interim head coach can do the job. It's those little decisions that only a head coach can make, I think, where he could be missed.
Keep in mind the line for the Ohio State game has not changed since the news came out. It's still 5.5 with Michigan favored. Boog, thank you so much.
You know why, Kev?
Why?
Kev, you know why? Because Michigan has the better football team. And I think regardless of how you look at it, they got the better quarterback, they got the better offensive line, they got the better defense. So the bettors are simply saying this. Regardless of whether Coach Harbaugh is going to be on the field or not, I'm going to side with the better football team. And I think that's a smart way to look at it.
To your point, though, if it's a close game, the head coach making a decision, we will see how that plays out in this rivalry. Okay, Boog? Thank you. Tony and Mike have more in tonight's PTI bonus topic.
All right, Wilbon, what is your reaction to Jim Harbaugh in Michigan accepting that 3-game suspension?
Well, Tony, there's a little risk involved here. Not this week, when I think that Michigan will just beat Maryland down, and they don't need Jim Harbaugh on the sideline for that. The risk comes after that, the next game, the regular season finale when they're playing Ohio State. And Michigan is betting that with that game in Ann Arbor, and they think Michigan's better. I think most people in the Big Ten who've been watching all these games all year think Michigan is better than Ohio State. Risk involved, sure. But I think they're also thinking, let's get through this. That'll be the third and final game of the suspension. And then we won't have to deal with this or appeals or discovery by the Big Ten or anything else once we're in the Final Four in the CFP. That's that. So that's what they're thinking. I don't know that I agree with it 100%, but I understand their approach.
I'm glad you think that you know what they're thinking. I have no idea what any of these people are thinking. I was stunned by this afternoon when I found out about this. I thought Harbaugh was ready to go to court tomorrow. He was ready to talk. He was going to stand out there with a megaphone and talk about his place in American football. I mean, and now that's not going to happen. And I began to think, well, why wouldn't it happen? And the first thought I had was that there was a preponderance of evidence that was shown to Michigan and shown to Harbaugh, and they folded their tent. They said, well, we're not going to beat this. And then I thought maybe Harbaugh said, I don't care because I'm going to the NFL anyway. And I thought about people who settle. What kinds of people settle? Are they people who believe they can win? Or are they people who are not sure they can win? Or are they people who really don't think they can win? But I'll say this, Mike. He already served a 3-game suspension at the beginning of the year, self-imposed. Now there's 2 more games. That's 5. Is he expecting his full salary this year after missing almost half the season? And to me, Mike, and I differ from you strongly in this, I would never want to go out against Ohio State, a top 3 team at worst in the country.
You don't want to.
Without my head coach.
You don't want to.
I would not do it.
Harbaugh didn't volunteer and put his hand in the air and say, I'll skip Columbus because they don't have good enough hot dog spots in Columbus. I'll just skip. No, they're playing in Ann Arbor. That's got to count for something. I'm not saying it wipes out, or it accounts entirely for an advantage. But Michigan didn't volunteer for this. They're trying to get through it. Tony, you mentioned something that's important. If there's discovery, what does Michigan feel it could be hurt by if there is discovery? But if there isn't, Mike, and you can make it through.
The Big Ten said they could not tie Harbaugh to it directly.
Right. It was a school
That's why
penalty.
I'm so surprised.
That's what they said, yeah. Well,
that's why I'm so surprised.
Maybe Michigan doesn't want discovery either. Either way, that's it. We're done. Back to you.